I'm Sarah Bernard, host of The Issues. This is a special edition where we'll focus on the Pam Hupp story and the investigators who've worked on this case in the past and ongoing. That's all coming up on this episode of The Issues. Stay with us. Thanks for staying with us for this special episode. Before we begin, let's review some facts we've learned during this case. Pam Hupp, who actually grew up in Delwood, Missouri, lived in the St. Louis region for many years and is currently serving a life sentence in Missouri's Chillicothe Correctional Center for the murder of Louis Guppenberger in her O'Fallon, Missouri home. Pam claimed the murder was self-defense, but she ultimately pled guilty to the charge. Pam is also facing charges of the murder of her friend, Betsy Faria, and her own mother, with the motive being financial gain. Renee Zellweger produced and starred in an NBC series about Hupp. Rebecca Pittman, author of a book about the case, Countdown to Murder, is here along with a few other important guests to discuss this issue. So welcome, both of you, or all of you, all three of you. Rebecca Pittman, author of the book Countdown to Murder. We're so happy that you're here, and you brought with you many of the investigators who worked on this case. So we welcome both of you. We've got Chief John Neske, Chief of the O'Fallon Police Department currently, and in the past you worked on this case, and retired Lieutenant Brian Hilke. Welcome to you as well. So you retired about a year ago, May 2021. So you were both the Chief, you were first on the scene when you got a phone call. You were driving on patrol, or just driving, I guess?
I was captain in charge of the patrol division at the time, and it was pretty much a desk job. I just happened to be driving near the area, actually coming home from lunch, or back to the office from lunch when this crazy call came out, so I did respond.
So what made the call so crazy?
Well, you have to understand, middle of the day in a nice neighborhood in a nice city like O'Fallon, you don't have stranger on stranger crimes for people, housewives and things of that nature. So this was very bizarre to have a call like that in the middle of the day.
So the call that came in, it was a 911 call that Pam Hupp had made, saying that she had shot and killed an intruder in her home.
Yes, so as it was playing out on the radio, the dispatcher was retelling what she was saying on the phone, and saying that somebody was trying to get her. They tried to get her inside her vehicle. They chased her inside her house. This was all playing out in real time.
Right.
And then at the time that it was, well, she shot him. He was trying to get to her in the bedroom. So that was happening real time.
So you go immediately. You were the first one on the scene.
Yes.
And what were your thoughts as you were approaching the home? Were you worried? Were you concerned about her? Were you concerned for her?
Well, anytime you go to a scene where there's potential additional violence, you have to use caution. I park one house away. I observe before I get out to make sure there's nobody running around with a weapon or something something like that. I see her outside. She's near her car. There's one car in the driveway. The garage door's up. She's holding a dog on a leash. There's the driver's door was open on the little gray car that was in the driveway. As I exit the vehicle, she's yelling to me that she shot him. She shot him. I asked is he moving? And she said no. I asked if there was anybody else in the house or around. She says no, that he was by himself. So I immediately go inside the house, and I could see him. Louis was laying on the floor. The victim was on the floor. Obvious gunshot wounds to the chest, and he was obviously deceased.
Mm-hmm. At this point, you didn't know it was Pam Hupp?
No, it was just a victim of a violent crime at this point in time. The second officer arrives on scene, and we clear the house. We make sure there's nobody else inside the residence, and it was clear. We could see the weapon that she used. It was on the bed. A .38 revolver was sitting on the bed. The house was clear. The house was clean, neat as a pin. And so when we exit, now we could not clear the basement. The problem was when Louis died, he collapsed on the floor in the hallway, and his head was up against the the door going into the basement.
Okay.
So I asked Pam at the time, is there any other way inside the basement? And she said no. So we felt fairly confident that there was nobody else in the basement, but you can't be 100% certain.
Right.
So at that time, I go back out to the garage, and she tells me a quick story about how she was backing out of the garage. She had run errands most of the morning. She'd come back home for a little break, ate a lunch or something like that, and that she was backing out to leave. Somebody got into her car, threatened her with a knife, and said they were going to get Russ's money. So at that time, I asked her, who's Russ? She says, I don't know any Russ. I don't know who she's talking about. I don't know Russ. She repeated the story multiple times.
She said she didn't know anybody named Russ.
She said that 2 or 3 times.
Okay.
Because every time she asked me or said that we're going to get Russ's money, I would ask her, who's Russ? I still think she's a victim. She could be in some sort of shock, so I want to try to draw this out of her, who this person is.
What was her appearance, her mood, her everything? Was there anything unusual in your mind about someone who had just shot and killed somebody?
No, and you have to be careful about that, because if she's a true victim, they can respond in many different ways. She was exceptionally excited. She was not mad. She was not upset. She was not, but she was very excited. She was talking fast.
Okay.
She was talking loud, but I never got fear from her or anything of that nature.
So when you found out soon after you had been there that her last name was Hupp, and you had recalled the story from the past, the trial.
Well, actually, in
Should we direct?
Brian was there at the time, and we were standing and discussing the case. We just thought it was maybe a drug deal gone bad, and they had the wrong house. That's kind of the way we were going.
Okay.
We were starting to contact our undercover detectives. We were starting to contact our patrol officers. We were trying to find out, is there a Russ around here? Is there a bad guy house similar in the area? That they just hit the wrong house. That's what we were thinking.
Okay.
And at that time, go ahead, Brian.
And then it was at that time where the officer that actually got a written statement from her in the ambulance came and said, here's the statement, and relayed who it was. And I said, it's Huff, right? H-U-F-F. And they're like, no, it's H-U-P-P, Pam Hupp. And that's when the light bulb went on for a lot of us.
Okay. And what was your thought at that point? The light bulb went off. What was the light bulb?
Well, I knew that it was going
There's more to this story?
There was going to be a lot to the story. I knew that there was going to be immediate media attention just from the prior stories that had been done by Channel 2, by Dateline,
Right.
the Post-Dispatch, all these different media outlets. So we knew that it was going to be a high-profile case.
Yeah, okay. So a week or so later, you accompanied her in a police car to the police station.
Yeah, it was actually a week, exactly the day to a week of the murder.
Okay.
We decided to take her into custody. We had coordinated that with the prosecutor's office. And 2 of our sergeants, who were actually detectives of mine that got promoted, were very upset that they weren't able to be a part of the case.
Okay.
So this was kind of like our nod to them that, hey, you didn't get to work the case, but you're going to be able to make the arrest. So the 2 officers, the 2 sergeants made the traffic stop, conducted the arrest, and then one of my lead detectives and I actually took her to the station.
Okay, and what was that like? How was she in the car? This is a week now after the murder had happened. What was her mood like?
Still arrogant. I always describe her as cold, very emotionless, very, really no reaction whatsoever. In fact, when we discussed with her that she was being taken into custody, she was getting charged with murder, we had all this evidence, her only reply was that she was cold and asked if I could turn down the AC, which that in of itself is just a cold response.
Yeah, right. So let's go back to the scene of the crime for a moment, and then I want to make sure we get a moment to talk to you, Rebecca, about the book and these gentlemen, how they've helped you with your research. At this scene, and anyone who's seen the NBC portrayal of this drama in real life as it unfolded for you all, there was a piece of carpet that Pam cut and Lewis was standing on when he was shot and killed. What is the significance of that, do you think?
Well, I mean, for me, there was a whole lot of weird occurrences. And in fact, the company that I teach for, we do a case study on this, and we talk about all these weird indications that we're kind of like, that just doesn't seem right. And that was one of them. The 911 call was one, the carpet the book that she had on on the stand out in the living room.
Which was?
So it was a book about a serial killer who killed people different ways.
Okay,
That was the
so-
only book that was actually out almost like it was staged.
Okay, so the carpet, what led to the idea of maybe this was premeditated and planned, and that
Yeah.
was part of it.
Yeah, eventually, once we started putting all the pieces together, we talked to some key witnesses, we got the Google waypoints, all this information and evidence that came together, that's how we put it together.
Yes. Okay, Rebecca, let's talk to you about your book. So Countdown to Murder, what led you to write this book? At what point, you live in Colorado, and you heard about this story, and you've written many similar, I wouldn't say similar, but books of similar types of dramas and interesting scientific things. So what led you to this story and to these gentlemen?
A friend of mine that I met when I was writing about Limp Mansion texted me and said, "Have you heard of the weird story going on out here in St. Louis?" I said, "No." And she sent me some information, and I Googled it, and I went, "Oh my gosh." And I love psychology. And this was one of those stories that you just have to get into. It was so bizarre. And it was the arrogance of this woman and the audacity of the crimes that really, I think, capture your attention.
So you recognized that just in your initial research?
Yeah, absolutely.
And then how easy or difficult was it for you to do research for the book?
Well, thanks to all of these gentlemen, it was a lot easier. They gave me so much of their time. Everybody was so gracious, and the book is the book because of them.
So for you gentlemen, why was it important for you to tell your knowledge of this story to Rebecca for her research?
She was a nice, kind person. When I spoke to her, she was easy to talk to.
It's as simple as that. So you saw the importance of a book being written about this story.
I thought it was important that they get the correct information.
Yeah, there's two main reasons why I like getting this information out. Is one, I like to brag on my team, and it really starts with the chief, who was the first one on scene, all the way to the prosecutor who prosecuted the case. Whether it was crime scene, detectives, officers, everybody did an amazing job. And really, without a great team, this wouldn't have been as successful as it was. The second reason is obviously to try to learn from it. That's what we do with our training company, is try to teach, hey, these are things that we ran into. So it's important that people know the facts, know where pitfalls can happen, and like I said, I like to brag on my team.
Yeah, that's awesome. And you're in the business now of teaching law enforcement officers about murder scenes and things like that,
Yes, so
investigations.
we actually do a case study on Pam Hupp on our investigation with my company, Vista Law Enforcement Training and Consulting.
Interesting. One final question. How do you feel that your characters were portrayed on the NBC show?
Well, as I like to describe it, they kind of balled all of the police people into one.
Okay.
So, it's just, I know they have time limitations. They had
Right.
42 minutes to tell the whole story.
Yeah, I mean, the character was my name, but by far that was not me.
Yeah.
Like I said, there was probably 30 or 40 people that played an integral part in this case. Obviously, it's made for TV.
Right.
I know watching it, as I was watching it unfold on TV, I knew I was going to get a lot of
Ripping?
yeah, a lot of ripping.
Yeah, of course.
Which is fine, but
Yeah.
and that's why really anytime I get the chance, I like to brag on everyone that did a great job on this case.
That's awesome. Stay with us. There's a lot more to come about this interesting and hard to believe case.
What do you think you're doing, Kevin?
Was just gonna drive home.
There are several warning signs present that you shouldn't be driving.
Like hearing voices.
Like your text-to-emoji ratio?
Oh man, the selfies. Selfie, nailed it.
We all have warning signs that let us know that we're probably not okay to drive. Mine is pretending to be your subconscious.
Craig, come on man, let's split a ride home.
Visitors and residents love the St. Louis Zoo because it's free. There's a train, a carousel, opportunities to make new friends, and plenty of fun learning experiences with the animals 363 days a year. So come and experience St. Louis.
Welcome back. In case you're just joining us, today is a special edition of The Issues with a focus on the book Countdown to Murder, Pam Hupp. We've heard from the O'Fallon Chief of Police and one of the O'Fallon detectives, and now we're joined by the prosecuting attorney Mike Wood and assistant prosecuting attorney Delaney Harms with Lincoln County, along with Detective Bill Wilcox. Welcome, all three of you. So glad that you're here. You all have a very interesting and important job right now working on a retrial of the case of Betsy Faria, who was the friend of Pamela Hupp, who died 11 years ago, was it? Something like that?
Yeah.
A long time ago. So what's it like, prosecuting attorney Mike Wood, what's it like to bring a case back that was tried once 11 years ago? How unusual is that?
Extremely unusual. It's something that you never see. I think what was extremely unique about this particular case is that not only was Russell Faria tried a first time and convicted, but he was also retried a second time, and at that point he was acquitted. So shortly after that, that case under the old administration had been closed. They weren't willing to open it up and take another look, even though there was significant testimony and evidence to point to other suspects at that time. And so now we're in a position to where Billy Wilcox, who's assisted me, as well as Delaney Harms, had to take what essentially had been a case that had been completely neglected and destroyed. And it took us over a year to put the file back together.
So
not only did we put the file back together, we had to reinvestigate the entire case and follow the leads that had never been followed up on, and those were cold leads, but we've put together a really fantastic case.
And so how was the investigation this time around different from the first time when Russ was on trial for the murder of his wife?
So my opinion of the first case was that the investigation was single scope. It was very narrow and did not encompass what ought to be a complete and thorough investigation, which is developing all of the facts, and which is important. Investigators at that time had identified early on that Mr. Faria was their suspect and didn't take the time to take a look at any other evidence that could have potentially exonerated him or led to another suspect.
So this other suspect, Pam Hupp, you had a particular interest perhaps in the case and noticed that there might have been, you and others, that she might have been a suspect. And you ran for election. Was it based on this case and your strong feelings about it?
By and large. There were a lot of issues that we dealt with, but I can tell you that the one issue that people cared about was the fact that we were willing to open the case. We didn't come out and say we knew where the facts would lead. We didn't come out and say that we thought that it was Pam Hupp. Certainly there was a lot of evidence that pointed that way. That was evidence that came out during the trial. That was evidence that came out during her actions in St. Charles County with Louis Guppenberger. And so we put the file back together, took a look at it. It was obvious to us that all of the facts pointed towards her and didn't require any type of manipulation or that you would have to twist things in order to make it fit. It neatly fit, and that's why we were so confident that was the right person. And we took great lengths to also exclude anybody else through new DNA technology, new witness statements, so we felt pretty good about what we did.
How difficult was it to convince others that there might be this opportunity to bring back the trial and a new suspect?
I don't think that was very difficult at all. Well,
You had enough evidence.
in terms of the citizens of Lincoln County, they were hungry for it. Those were people who wanted answers. And like I had said, that was a case that really destroyed the community and led to a lot of distrust with law enforcement, distrust with the courts. And so we felt that it was incumbent on us to clear that. To show that we could do the right thing and that's what justice called for. And I'll give it over to Billy. I think that in terms of law enforcement, there were still people who were involved in law enforcement that didn't want to take another look at it.
Would you say that's true, Detective?
Oh, absolutely. That we asked for this case to be reopened, it wasn't going to be, that nobody wanted to cooperate with us. Now we're getting a lot of cooperation from other departments, and some of our witnesses, we've come up with even new witnesses who were never interviewed in the first place.
So you're running the war room, so to speak, for the evidence in this in the case. How difficult is it to look at evidence from 11 years ago?
It's extremely difficult, and to work with that evidence and statements and then develop new witnesses or new interviews with other people. We've found several witnesses that we've talked to. I think we've talked to more witnesses in the original investigation who mentioned Pam's name. They wanted to talk to investigators at the time, and they wouldn't have anything to do with it. They didn't want to hear anything about her. They just wanted to key in on Russ. We've been able to, through our investigation, some people who should have been interviewed in the first place they were skipped over.
Yeah, Mr. Harms, why do you feel that the door was shut on these witnesses early on?
Again, as Mike said, the law enforcement at the time in Lincoln County under that administration simply wanted to focus on Russ. They had blinders on. They didn't want to hear anything else. So often you see in all the reports, hundreds of pages of supplements, that they simply focus only on Russ Faria. When Billy, Mr. Wilcox goes back and interviews these people, the other witnesses say, well, we tried to tell them about Pam. We tried to tell them this fact and that fact. You don't find it in any of the reports. And the reason is because they didn't want anything that deflected away from Russ Faria.
So Pam Hupp's attorney is arguing that the statute of limitations might be up on a case that was first tried 11 years ago. Is there any relevance there?
There's no, not at all, because there's no statute of limitation on murder. The armed criminal action that's usually accompanies the murder with either a gun or a knife or something like that arguably should still be held open for a murder, but the statute literally says it's only open for 3 years. But what difference does it make?
Right.
Because we're seeking the death penalty. And we can't add 10 or 15 or 20 years on an armed criminal action if we get what we're seeking, which is the death penalty.
Right.
So it really didn't make any difference. But there's no statute on murder.
Mr. Wood, why do you feel that it's important for the public to see this case retried, and where is the good in this for us?
So, and especially when we dealt with Rebecca, I have to give her credit for doing
Rebecca
what she
Pittman,
did
the author of
and
Countdown
putting
to
the
Murder.
book together, because nationwide, the law enforcement community has been called into question, and the institutions that we rely on that hold society together have really, those foundations have been shaken. And it's a small part that we can do, but as far as our community locally, we have to show that eventually justice will be served, and we have to show that we have the ability to take bad cops and take them out of the mix with the good cops, that we want to focus on the good people and focus on the good work, and that people can then, when we have cases that move forward outside of just this realm, that they can know that we're doing the right thing and we're trying to do the right thing, we'll handle it professionally. And so I think it's really important to show that's, even though we're 10 years later, that eventually will happen.
And I think that's what compelled you to run.
No doubt.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely. Thank you so much, all of you, for joining us today. We're going to take a quick break, and when we return, we'll hear from Rebecca Pittman one more time.
$150 over $90.
180 over 111.
160 over 110. I had a stroke.
This is what high blood pressure looks like. You might not feel its symptoms, but the results from a stroke are far from invisible or silent. If you've come off your treatment plan, get back on it, or talk with your doctor to create an exercise, diet, and medication plan that works for you. Go to loweryourhbp.org.
If I would have followed a treatment plan, I would not be in this situation.
Welcome back. We've been discussing the high-profile case of Pam Hupp, and joining me again before we close the show is the author of the book, Countdown to Murder, Pam Hupp, Rebecca Pittman. Welcome back, Rebecca.
Thank you, Sarah.
So this is your 16th book, is that correct?
Yes.
So are all the books about murders?
No. A lot of them seem to have murders in them. The Lizzie Borden book I did find new evidence in that case. So I think I'm a wannabe detective somewhere in there.
Yeah, I would say so. It sounds like you've done a great job investigating and getting information for this particular book, which is very new. I mean, the story about Pam Hupp is, it's very recent years. So
Right.
you've had the privilege of talking to people, like we've just been talking on the set, to detectives and other people who are working on the case right now.
Well, that's the thing, it's imminent. But I want to say that talking to these men has been a thrill of a lifetime for me, because you're working with good men. These are men with integrity that are unraveling what was a mess. I'm going to just leave it there. But they're having to start over and redo it. And I know some of the struggles they've shared with me in getting people to talk to them, and the hours and hours and hours they've put in. And I'm just so proud of them. I'm just tickled to death that they could all come.
So you're holding a copy of the book. Let's hold that up so we can see the cover. And that's a picture of Pam Hupp. So is there anybody that you wish that you could have talked to for this book, but you weren't able to?
Probably several people. I would have liked to have filled out more about Louis Gumpenberger as a person, not just a victim. But his mother was still very distraught. I have since had his sister reach out to me that would like to be included in the sequel that I'll be doing after the trial, because I do have an entire chapter dedicated to Betsy that her daughter Mariah was lovely enough to do several interviews, sent me a lot of photos. Her sister Julie let me interview her, her best friend Rita Wolf. That's important to me. I don't want them to just be victims. These were people that had lives ahead of them, and this woman decided that they weren't going to have them.
So we talked in the first segment today about the NBC show that Renee Zellweger is producing and starring in. How was it watching that show? I assume you watched it.
I did.
And do you feel that there were parts of your book that were in the show? Is there anything that was different about the story as they retold it in that format?
Well, anytime you do a mini-series, you're going to have filler. And I think they did that. There was a lot of poetic license. I was a little shocked at some of the things that were put in that so far have only been hinted at. But it's a production, and I think as far as hitting the salient points, they did a very good job. I was a little surprised at the tone of the show. It felt more like a farce or a parody. And now that I've become friends with some of these, victims' families, I just went, I don't know how they responded to it.
I'm sure that's hard for them to see.
I'm sure it was really hard.
All right, so let's talk about your sequel. So you mentioned you have a sequel to the book already in the planning stages. What are you going to be talking about? Obviously the retrial of the case, and what else?
There are some people I didn't get to speak to before, including Detective Hilke that we had on. There are some people that have a lot of great information that are coming to the front that I would love to talk to. I am interested in looking into the rumors that there might be someone in Florida that Pam may have been instrumental in their demise. I don't know that for sure, and I'm going to underscore that. I don't know that for sure. But with her, where there's smoke, there seems to be fire. So
you're doing some investigation.
Yeah.
You're doing the pre-detective work on that case.
Yeah, and they've been kind enough to let me. Obviously, I'm not going to do anything to mess them up. But
do you plan to have an opportunity to speak with Pam Hupp for your sequel?
I would very much like to. I have a feeling her attorney, because of the ongoing trial, is probably going to say don't talk to anybody. But I'm going to give it a shot.
Of course you are.
Of course I am.
Because you're Rebecca Pittman. Very good. Well, thank you so much for sharing your time with us today and your book and all of the guests that you were able to provide for us today for the issues. We really, really appreciate it, Rebecca. We can't wait to read the sequel and to see whatever is next on the horizon for you.
Thank you.
And we want to thank all the guests who joined us today. And if you'd like to learn more information on this unbelievable story, you can certainly find it in Rebecca Pittman's book, Countdown to Murder. It's available on Amazon and in your favorite local bookstore. And as always, we thank you for your thoughts and comments on the issues. And we just want to remind you all that you too can join the discussion. Be sure to check us out online and on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram. And don't forget to download the free STL TV app. I'm your host, Sarah Bernard, and stay tuned for the next episode of The Issues.